1994 to Indiana. David Merritt was the kind of man who fixed everything himself. One hot afternoon, he climbed up on his roof to patch a leak. He waved to his daughter. She waved back. That was the last time anyone ever saw him. His tools were still on the roof. His ladder was still standing. His keys and wallet were still in the house. But David, gone. No fall, no blood. No clue. Police searched for months, then years. No leads, no answers. Just a family left behind, and a mystery no one could solve. But 11 years later, something happened. New owners started remodeling David's old house. They knocked down a wall, pulled up the floor, and found something sealed beneath the boards. A hidden hatch. What was inside shocked everyone, and proved David never left that house. David Merritt was the kind of man who couldn't sit still. If something in the house was broken, he'd fix it. A creaky stair? He'd tighten it. A leaky pipe? He had the tools. He was 42 years old. Worked as a mechanic for years, but that summer, he was between jobs. So he stayed busy around the house. David lived in a quiet neighborhood in Indiana. Small homes, big trees, kids rode bikes, dogs barked. Everyone knew everyone. It was safe. It was August 1994. The weather was hot and heavy. His wife, Linda, left early for work like usual. Their 13-year-old daughter, Katie, stayed home. She was watching cartoons in the living room. David grabbed his red toolbox and headed outside. There was a leak in the roof from last week's storm. He wanted to fix it before it rained again. He pulled a ladder from the shed, leaned it against the house, and climbed up. He didn't say much, just gave a small wave from above before getting to work. It was a normal afternoon. Nothing strange, nothing scary. No one knew this would be the last time David Merritt was seen alive. Katie remembers it clearly. She was sitting on the couch, eating a bowl of cereal. The TV was playing the Flintstones. She heard the ladder scrape against the house outside. So she got up and looked out the window. There he was, her dad, standing on the roof. He waved at her with his right hand, holding a hammer in the other. She waved back. He looked calm, just doing his thing. She didn't think anything of it. Katie went back to the couch. The cartoon kept playing. Minutes passed. Then hours. She never saw him come down. But she didn't realize that yet. She was just a kid. She thought he was still working, maybe in the shed or the garage. Now, when people ask her what she remembers most, she says, "That little wave. That's it. That's the last thing I saw." It was 6:10 p.m. Linda came home from work, tired, holding a fast food bag. She called out, "David? Katie?" Katie ran up and said, "He's still outside. He was fixing the roof." Linda looked confused. "Still? It's been hours." She walked outside. The ladder was still up. The toolbox was there, just like he left it. The roof was quiet. "David?" She called out. No answer. She climbed up a few steps, looked across the roof. Empty. She checked the backyard, the shed, the garage. Nothing. She went back in. Did he'd come back in the house? She asked Katie. Katie shook her head. "No, I thought he was still working." Linda checked every room. His shoes were still by the door. His truck keys were on the hook. His wallet was on the kitchen table. But David wasn't anywhere. That's when Linda said it out loud, almost in a whisper. "He's gone." At first, she thought maybe he went for a walk, or a neighbor called him over. But no one had seen him. It didn't make sense. Nothing looked wrong. But David Merritt had vanished. At 7:08 p.m., Linda picked up the phone and dialed 911. Her voice was calm at first, but shaking. "My husband was fixing our roof earlier today, and now we can't find him." The dispatcher asked if he had medical issues, if he'd ever wandered off before. No, she said. Never. He's never done anything like this. Police arrived within 20 minutes. 2 officers started checking the property. They looked at the roof. Nothing strange. No blood. No broken boards. They walked the yard with flashlights. Checked the shed. Looked inside the truck. Everything was normal. Then one officer asked, "Do you know if he had plans to leave?" Linda pointed at the table. "His wallet's right there. Keys too. He didn't go anywhere." Another officer checked the back fence for signs of a break. Nothing. It was like David Merritt had just disappeared. Right off the roof. By 8 p.m., more officers had arrived. They set up a small command post in the driveway. One officer climbed onto the roof to take photos. Another used a flashlight to scan every inch of the shingles. The roof was solid. No cracks, no holes, no signs that anyone had slipped or fallen. Not a single drop of blood. Nothing was broken or disturbed. It looked like David had been working, and then just disappeared. Deputies brought out tracking dogs. They sniffed David's toolbox, his work gloves, the ladder. The dogs moved in circles, tails high, then stopped. No trail, no direction. It was like they couldn't find a starting point. By now, the neighbors had come out of their homes. Some watched quietly from porches. Others offered to help. A few mentioned seeing David earlier that day. No one saw him leave. No one heard anything strange. Helicopters flew overhead with spotlights. They circled nearby woods and fields, but saw nothing. Officers checked under the house, inside the attic, behind the garage. They looked for footprints in the soft ground, for any signs that someone had carried him away. But the dirt was clean. Not even a scuff mark. It didn't make sense. There was no fall, no injury, no fight. Just silence. The officer in charge shook his head and said quietly to a deputy, "This isn't normal. This is something else." By 10 p.m., the neighborhood was dark again, except for the Merritt house. The porch light was on. So were the kitchen. Lights, hallway lights, bedroom lights. Inside, no one was sleeping. Katie sat on the couch, holding her knees. Her mom stood by the window, staring out every few minutes like she expected David to walk up the driveway. Officers moved in and out of the house quietly. They asked more questions but had fewer answers. Outside, volunteers formed a search line with flashlights. They walked the edges of the neighborhood, checking bushes, ditches, backyards. Still nothing. At midnight, one officer stayed parked outside, just in case. But even he admitted to his partner, "We don't even know what we're looking for." Back. Inside, Linda finally sat down, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Katie whispered, "Is he going to come back?" Her mom didn't answer. By 2 a.m., the lights were still on. Every time the house creaked or a dog barked in the distance, they flinched. No one had answers. No one had sleep. Katie would later say, "That night didn't feel real. It felt like we were inside a bad dream, one that just wouldn't stop." In the first 48 hours, police treated David's disappearance like an accident. Maybe he slipped off the roof. Maybe he got hurt and crawled away. Teams searched every inch of the property. Officers knocked on doors, asking neighbors if they'd seen anything. Some opened their sheds. Some checked their basements. But no one had answers. A dive team was brought in to check the nearby pond. They used sonar and dragged the water with heavy ropes. It took hours. Nothing turned up. No body. No tools. Back at the house, they looked again at the roof. No damage. No broken shingles. No sign of blood. No handprint on the ladder. If he had fallen, they would have found something. But they didn't. It was like the roof had swallowed him, still. Police told the family to stay hopeful. Maybe he wandered off. Maybe he hit his head and got confused. Linda didn't believe that. Katie didn't either. He's not the kind of man who wanders off, Linda said. He's the kind of man who comes home for dinner, Katie added. But no matter how many places they checked, there was no sign of David Merritt the next day. Canine units were brought in. 3 trained search dogs arrived with handlers. They let the dogs sniff David's work, gloves, and his shirt. The dogs were eager. They started sniffing around the yard, the house, the back fence. One of them stopped under the roofline and circled slowly. Then, nothing. The dog sat down. No barking. No pull. No direction. Handlers tried again. Same result. It was like David had vanished into thin air. The dogs had nothing to track. That worried the officers. Even if someone leaves in a car, dogs usually find something. A scent trail. A hint. But here, there was nothing. Helicopters flew over the nearby woods, using heat sensors. They scanned tree lines and trails. It was a quiet, clear day, but they didn't see anyone. The police were running out of ideas. One officer said quietly, "People don't just disappear. There's always something." But in this case, there wasn't. No broken window. No forced door. No drag marks in the dirt. No scent. No blood. It was like David had gone up the ladder and never come back down. The family waited by the phone. It never rang. Reporters started showing up. Camera crews parked outside the house. Everyone wanted answers. Linda stood on the porch, holding back tears. She told them, he didn't run. He didn't leave. Something happened to him. Inside, Katie sat at the kitchen table. She pointed to a half-eaten sandwich on the counter. He made that right before he went out. He never finished it. His wallet was still in the living room. Keys by the door. Tools still on the roof. Nothing was missing. Not even his favorite watch. He was fixing a leak, Linda said. That's all. He wasn't planning anything. He had no reason to leave. Detectives asked about their marriage. Any arguments. Any money trouble. But Linda was calm. We're fine, she said. We had plans that weekend. The case wasn't adding up. And the more police looked, the less they found. Within a week, the neighborhood started talking. Not loud. Quiet whispers. Maybe he just left. Someone said at the store. Men do that. Another neighbor said, he was always working. Maybe he cracked. Some people started looking at Linda. She seems calm, one person said. Too calm. A local newspaper printed a small headline. Family man's secret life? They hinted at the usual things: affairs, gambling, double identity. But none of it was real. They were guessing. Still, the damage was done. Linda stopped going outside. Katie stopped going to school. People who once waved now looked away. There was no proof David had done anything wrong. But the longer he stayed missing, the more people started filling in the blanks on their own. The police had no answers. The town needed a story. So they made one up. By the third week, the search teams began thinning out. Volunteers stopped showing up. The flyers were still taped to telephone poles, but now they looked weathered, edges curling, ink fading. Police held one final press conference. They said they were still actively investigating, but their body language told a different story. Behind the scenes, detectives were being reassigned. The lead investigator was moved to another case. Files were handed off. Fresh eyes were brought in, but no new questions were asked. The case was going cold. Linda didn't accept that. She went on local TV again, holding David's photo. She said, "We're still here. He's still missing. Somebody knows something." Katie stood beside her, holding her dad's flannel shirt. It still smelled like him, but tips had stopped coming in. No calls. No sightings. No notes left in mailboxes. Neighbors had gone quiet. Some even avoided the Merritts in the grocery store. It was as if the town had moved on, like forgetting was easier than wondering. But Linda didn't forget. Not for a second. She left the porch light on every night. She cooked dinner for 3, not 2. She still looked out the window at 6 p.m., just in case it was late October. Cold rain tapped on the windows of the new rental house Linda had moved into with Katie. It was smaller, quieter, but it didn't feel like home. Linda was folding laundry when the phone rang. It was 8:46 p.m. She walked over and answered without thinking. Hello? Silence. Not static, not a robocall. Just nothing. She waited, thinking maybe it was a dropped line. But then she felt it. Something about the silence felt heavy, like someone was there. Listening. She said, Hello? Who is this? Still nothing. She tried again. David? The line went dead. Linda stood frozen. She stared at the phone, her heart racing. She checked the caller ID. Blank. No number. No area code. Nothing. She called the phone company. They said the number didn't register. It wasn't recorded. It was like the call had never happened. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the kitchen with the lights on, staring at the phone. She didn't tell Katie right away. Not until the next morning. Katie just said, I heard it ring. I knew it was him. Police sent a tech expert to look into the call. They searched the logs, traced the network, but found nothing. It wasn't a blocked number. It wasn't a prank. There was simply no record of it ever existing. The officer wrote in his report, untraceable, no origin point. Linda started locking all the doors, even in broad daylight. She double-checked windows, pulled curtains tight. The silence that once felt strange now felt threatening. Katie stopped sleeping in her room. She moved to the couch and left the TV on all night. That one ring had shaken everything. Was it a clue? A warning? A mistake? No one knew, but one thing had changed. For the first time in weeks, it felt like David might still be out there. Somewhere. Watching. Waiting. From the air, the neighborhood looked peaceful. Every lawn was trimmed. Every house had clean siding and a mailbox out front. Some had American flags. Some had porch swings. It was the kind of place where people waved at each other, where garage doors stayed open on weekends, where kids rode bikes until sunset. But after David Merritt disappeared, everything changed. Neighbors started locking their doors earlier. Porch lights came on before the sun went down. Parents told their kids to stay inside. No more bikes. No more backyard playdates. People started pulling curtains closed, even during the day. It wasn't just fear. It was something deeper. Something like suspicion. They all knew David. He fixed cars. He helped carry groceries. He once shoveled snow for 6 houses in one day. So how could someone like that just vanish? If something could happen to David, maybe something could happen to anyone. And the worst part? It didn't feel like a stranger had done it. It felt like maybe the danger had been right there, on the same street, in one of those perfect little houses. Watching. 2 doors down from the Merritts lived a man named Mr. Lutz. No one knew much about him. He didn't mow his own lawn. He never came to block parties. He had lived there for over 20 years, never married. No visitors, no kids. When police canvassed the street after David disappeared, they knocked on Lutz's door. He opened it slowly, then stood in the gap, not inviting them in. Behind him, the house was dark. No lights, no sound. The officer asked if he'd seen or heard anything unusual the day David vanished. Mr. Lutz just said, "No, I mind my own." Then he shut the door. But as one officer walked away, he noticed something upstairs. Binoculars sitting on a window ledge. The lenses faced straight out, toward the Merritt house. The officer made a note of it. When they returned days later with more questions, Lutz didn't answer the door. Neighbors said he spent hours by that upstairs window, watching. Some said He'd been seen writing things down in a notebook, but there was no proof he did anything wrong. He never broke the law. He just watched and stayed quiet. A group of neighborhood kids said they kept seeing someone strange behind the houses. Late at night, he didn't walk on the sidewalk. He stayed in the shadows, near fences and garbage cans. He was skinny, one boy said. Twitchy. Like his arms didn't know where to go. He mumbled to himself, said another. We couldn't hear what he was saying. Just noises. Some parents said it was probably a homeless man. Maybe someone passing through, but no one ever caught him. The police were told. They checked the alley, looked through backyards, asked around. Nothing prints. No video. No name. Just kids saying. There was a man in the alley again. After a few weeks, the sightings stopped. Or maybe people just stopped reporting. But even years later, some kids now grown say they still remember that man and how he watched them without blinking. A few weeks after the case went cold, an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Halpern came forward with something new. She told police she remembered seeing David Merritt just days before he vanished, standing behind his garage, talking to someone. It was a man in a tan coat, she said. They weren't just chatting. It looked serious. She watched from her kitchen window. The two men stood close. One pointed. The other shook his head. David looked tense. Then he walked back toward the house. Mrs. Halpern didn't think much of it at the time. She assumed it was someone asking about work, maybe roof repairs or lawn help. But after David disappeared, that memory started to bother her. She gave her statement. Police asked around. No one else had seen the man. No one knew who he was. There were no doorbell cameras in 1994. No video. No sketches. They checked the local job records, delivery logs, even door-to-door sales licenses. Nothing matched. The man in the tan coat was never identified. And just like everything else in this case, the lead faded away. Still, Mrs. Halpern swears to this day, I saw him. That man was real. After Mrs. Halpern came forward about the man in the tan coat, another neighbor stepped up, Mr. Griggs, who lived behind the Merritts. He told police David was fixing a fence the week before he vanished. But the thing is, it wasn't his fence. It was an old wooden barrier between David's yard and the empty house next door. The boards were rotting. A few had fallen. David had started replacing them on his own. No one asked him to. He meant. Well, Mr. Griggs said, but some people don't like others messing with their property. The house next door was in probate, sitting empty, tied up in court. But word spread that someone in the family was planning to move in. According to one neighbor, that person had already come by once and didn't like that David was nosing around. A few thought he was too involved, that he was always offering to fix things, always asking questions. Others said David was just being kind. That's who he was. But even kindness can upset the wrong person, especially on a street where people like their fences old and their secrets buried. A few months after the case went cold, a new detective named Ramos was assigned to review the file. He decided to revisit the neighborhood himself. He went door to door, wearing plain clothes, just knocking, asking friendly questions. Some people talked. Others didn't. Single quotes. One man said he didn't remember David at all. Another claimed to be out of town that week, even though his mail never stopped. More than a few didn't open their doors at all. Some peeked through blinds. Others ignored the knocks completely. Ramos said it felt like the street was closed up, like no one wanted the past stirred. One elderly woman opened her door just a crack. She looked at Ramos for a long time, then said something he never forgot. You shouldn't keep digging. People forget for a reason. Then she closed the door before he could say a word. Ramos marked it down in his notes. general reluctance. Unusual silence for a missing person case. He had no search warrants. No probable cause. He couldn't force anyone to speak. But the tension was real. Tight. Heavy. It was clear the neighbors weren't scared of the police. They were scared of something else. Or someone. Later that same night, Detective Ramos sat on a porch step across the street, flipping through his notebook. A soft-spoken woman approached from next door. She had short gray hair, moved slow, and lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "You're the one asking about the man who disappeared, right?" she asked. Ramos nodded. "David Merritt. You remember him?" She took a drag, eyes fixed on the street. "Yeah, he was good people." They sat in silence for a few seconds. Then she said something that stopped him cold. "You're looking for something that doesn't want to be found." Ramos glanced up. "What do you mean?" She looked right at him. Calm, certain. "This street buries things. Always has." Then, without another word, she stood up, walked back to her house, and shut the door behind her. Ramos never got her name. But in his official report, he wrote the last sentence carefully. "Uncooperative witness, but possible insight into deeper history of the street. Suggest pattern." It was the first time someone hinted this might not be a random tragedy. That maybe it had happened before. 6 months after David vanished, Linda and Katie moved out of the house. They didn't want to, but staying felt impossible. The roof was still there. The ladder was gone, but the memory wasn't. Every corner of the house held something that hurt. The chair where he sat, his shoes by the door, his toolbox in the garage. The fridge still had a note with his handwriting. "Pick up milk." Linda packed everything in boxes. Some she labeled. Others she didn't open. At all. Katie cried when they took down the porch swing. It was the last place she saw her dad smile. The night before they left, Linda turned on the porch light like she always had. Then she left it on. The house sold 2 months later, but some things weren't included in the deal, like the ache-in, the walls, and the feeling that someone never finished coming home. The first buyers were a young couple. They moved in during spring. They said it felt peaceful at first. But by winter, something had changed. They complained about creaky floors, cold drafts in warm weather, lights that flicked even after repairs. They left after 19 months. No official reason, just moved out. A second family bought the house the following summer. They didn't last long either. Neighbors said they were quiet, kept to themselves. But one day, without warning, a moving truck pulled up. Gone. No goodbye. After that, real estate agents stopped showing the house right away. They let it sit. Some whispered about bad energy. Others just said it never felt right. There was never a crime report. Never a break-in. But every new family that moved in left sooner than planned. As if the house didn't want anyone to stay. Or maybe it remembered something. The second owners kept a journal. They didn't call it paranormal. They just called it weird stuff. The first entry, light above hallway flickers randomly. Changed the bulb. Still flickers. Then, laundry room door opened twice on its own. Then, thermostat keeps dropping in back hallway. Repairman checked it twice. Said it's fine. They joked about it at first. Called it the ghost of bad wiring. But then their dog started acting strange. One night, it walked toward the master bedroom. Then it stopped cold, just outside the doorway. It growled. Backed away. Refused to go in. After that, it avoided that part of the house completely. Wouldn't even walk past the hall if the door was open. The owners said they felt a heaviness in the room. A pressure. They never said it was haunted. Not out loud, but they moved out 6 months later. Left a journal behind. The last page said, "This house is trying to tell us something." By the time she was 21, Katie had moved to another town, but sometimes, on weekends, she would drive back. She didn't park directly in front of the house. She stayed across the street. She never got out, just stared. The new owners had changed. The paint, cut the trees, put in a new mailbox. But to her, it still looked the same dot. It still looked like the last place her dad had been alive. Sometimes she cried. Other times she just sat quietly. Once, she brought flowers. Didn't leave them, just held them in the car. She told a friend once, "I keep thinking I should have gone outside that day. Maybe if I did, he wouldn't have disappeared." She still dreams about the ladder, the red steps, the way it leaned. Just slightly to the left dot in the dream. She climbs it, but never reaches the top dot. By 2005. A new couple had moved into the house. They were planning to stay long-term. They wanted to update things, start fresh. So they decided to pull up the old carpet and install hardwood floors. That's when they noticed a dot as they rolled up the carpet near the master bedroom hallway. One of them stepped on the subfloor and paused. Did you hear that? It didn't sound like solid wood. It sounded hollow. They tapped it with a hammer. Thump. Not the usual thick thud of foundation. This was softer, almost like an empty space beneath dot. The husband pulled out the old blueprints they got from the city. He unrolled them on the kitchen table and traced the lines with his finger. According to the plans, that section of floor was supposed to be solid. No crawl space, no storage, no pipes, nothing. But the sound said otherwise. They checked for loose boards. Nothing obvious. No trapdoor. No vent dot, just clean flooring. But something was off. The kind of off you can't unhear once you've noticed it. They didn't want to jump to conclusions, but they also couldn't ignore it. Later that evening, they decided to knock again. This time with a rubber mallet. They worked in slow, even Rose tapping along the floor, listening. Most of it sounded normal. But then, thud, thud, echo. Right under the wall near the far corner of the hallway. The sound changed. It was deeper, duller. The couple looked at each other. Something's under there. They got down on their hands and knees, ran their fingers along the floor, tried to feel for a seam, a panel, anything that would explain it. They even checked the wall itself, knocked on the baseboards, ran a flashlight along the edge. Nothing moved. Nothing opened. But the sound didn't lie. Something was underneath. Something. Sealed. The next morning, they called a contractor friend. Asked him to bring tools. He arrived that weekend with a crowbar and a pry knife. He tapped the floor once and immediately said, "This isn't standard. Someone put something here on purpose." The couple stood silently as he started working on the boards. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to find what no one else had in 11 years. It was spring 2005. The new owners had been in the house for a few months and decided it was time to remodel. They hired a contractor to update the hallway near the master bedroom. Fresh drywall, better insulation, and new paint. The job started like any other. The contractor removed the base trim, then began cutting into the old drywall. But instead of open space between the studs, he hit something hard. Old wood. He pulled back more plaster. Behind it wasn't framing. It was solid, aged wood planks running sideways. And it wasn't just sitting there. It was nailed in tight. "This isn't part of the structure," he said. The contractor stopped working and called the owners over. He showed them the sealed section. No gaps, no insulation. Just thick boards. It looked like someone had covered something up on purpose. Could be old storage, the contractor guessed, or something they tried to wall off. But there was no cabinet, no vent, no crawl space listed on any plans. It didn't match anything, and something about it felt wrong. Still, they decided to keep going, to see what was behind it. They didn't expect what they'd find next. Once the wall came down, they cleared the floor beneath. There was more dust than usual. Old nails. Bits of plaster. But then they saw it. Right in the floor. A row of warped, discolored boards that didn't match the rest of the flooring. They were nailed in separately, as if added later. The contractor tapped one with a hammer. Hollow. He took a pry bar and gently lifted one end. The wood creaked. Underneath, something metal dot. It was a hatch. The handle was rusted, iron, curved, and sunken into a square of black wood. Nobody moved. The homeowner stood frozen, staring at it. This wasn't part of the original house. It wasn't even hidden well. It was just sealed, like someone wanted it covered, but not gone. The couple looked at each other. "Don't open it," one said. They didn't. Instead, they stepped back, grabbed a phone, and called the police. When the 911 operator asked, "What's the emergency?" the owner said quietly, "We found something under our floor. Something that shouldn't be there." The police arrived in under 10 minutes. They walked in calm. But once they saw the hatch, their tone changed. The responding officers checked the floor, the wall, and the blueprints pulled from county records. There was nothing in the plans. No crawl space. No mention of a sealed chamber. Not even a note about extra support beams. The hatch wasn't just unusual. It was undocumented. One officer knelt down and examined the boards more closely. The nails had been driven in from the top and the sides. "That's not how you seal a trapdoor," he said. "That's how you hide one." Another officer tested the edges with a flashlight. The seams were tight. No air movement. No signs of damage. They noted the dust pattern, undisturbed for years. Then a detective arrived. He looked down at the hatch, then slowly up at the wall where it had been hidden. He whispered, almost to himself, "Somebody wanted this covered." The room fell quiet. What was sealed underneath was about to be unsealed. Once the officers had clearance, they started removing the remaining nails. The boards came up one by one. Underneath, the hatch creaked open, and then the smell hit. Everyone stepped back. It wasn't just musty or stale. It was sharp. Rotten, like dirt that had been trapped for years, mixed with something worse. The detective pulled his shirt over his mouth and motioned for a flashlight. They aimed it down through the hatch. What they saw didn't look like a crawl space. It didn't look like anything in a normal house. A crude wooden ladder led down into a dark, square space. The walls weren't concrete or brick. They were rough, patched together from boards and broken plaster. Some sections looked like old fencing. It wasn't deep, maybe 6 feet. But the angle made it hard to see clearly. The officers didn't say much. One of them muttered, "This isn't supposed to be here." They called for backup, sealed the hallway, and prepared to go down. Whatever this was, it hadn't been opened in a very long time, and no one could explain why it was there, or who built it, or what was waiting at the bottom. Crime scene tape went up. Detectives took photos. Then, one officer descended the ladder first. Moving slow. He reached the bottom and scanned the small space with his flashlight. The room was about the size of a walk-in closet. Just 6 feet deep, low ceiling, packed dirt floor. The walls had no insulation. Just scrap wood nailed together in rough patches. It was quiet. Then, in the far left corner, the light caught something. Bones. Curled, dry, resting on their side like the person had folded in on themselves. Near them lay a faded flannel shirt, torn at the collar, rolled halfway into the dirt, and next to it, barely visible in the dust, was a small rusted ring. A wedding band. The officer didn't say anything at first. He just backed up the ladder and radioed in what they'd found. Within minutes, the room was surrounded. Detectives moved in. Photos were taken. Evidence tagged. A coroner was called. So, was the lead investigator on the Merritt case from 1994. Nobody needed to say. It out loud, not yet. But every single person in that room knew they had just found David Merritt, and someone had buried him right under his own house. The bones were taken to the county medical examiner. But even before the test came back, there was no doubt. David's dental records matched. But the confirmation came even earlier from the person who knew him best. Katie Merritt, now 24 years old. She arrived at the scene hours later. The lead detective showed her the flannel shirt. Faded red, stained at the sleeves, torn in the back. Katie froze. "That's his," she said. Her voice broke. She touched the collar lightly, then pulled her hand away. "He was wearing that when he went on the roof." The detectives didn't say anything. They didn't have to. The wedding ring was also his. Linda, David's wife, confirmed the engraving inside. Katie stepped outside the police line, sat on the curb, and collapsed in tears, her head in her hands. All those years of wondering, hoping, blaming herself. And now she knew. He hadn't run. He hadn't left them. He had been there the whole time, just beneath their feet, buried by someone who wanted him, hidden forever. The county coroner released the report 2 days later. David Merritt did not fall. He didn't slip off the roof. He didn't collapse from heat stroke or of a medical episode. The official cause of death: blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. A single hit. From behind, no hesitation. No defensive wounds. The angle of the injury ruled out an accident. It also ruled out a fall. The blow was delivered directly, clean and forceful. The kind that stopped someone instantly. Whoever did it didn't panic. They didn't run. They covered the body, carried it, lowered it down into the hidden space, closed the hatch, sealed the wall, and walked away. Police declared the case an official homicide. After 11 years of silence, David Merritt's name was back in the news, this time under a different word: murder. Detectives reopened the original case file. They began re-interviewing neighbors. Old notes were pulled. Cold leads got warm again. One officer said quietly, "This wasn't just a cover-up. This was planned." Somebody knew what they were doing. Somebody had lived with the secret. And somebody maybe was still out there. By the end of the week, news trucks lined the block. The story spread fast. Local, then statewide, then national. Remains found beneath missing man's own house. Neighbors stood in their driveways, stunned. Some shook their heads. Others cried. For years, kids had trick-or-treated there. Packages were delivered. Families made dinner, watched TV, all just feet above where David Merritt had been hidden. One neighbor told a reporter, "We walked past that spot 100 times. And he was right there." Another said, "I always felt something wrong in that house. I just never knew what." For 11 years, people had lived, cooked, and slept with his body sealed beneath the floor. He never left the neighborhood. He never even left the house. The mystery of where David Merritt had gone was over, but the question of who put him there, that was just beginning. The coroner's report was now final. David Merritt didn't fall. He didn't collapse. He didn't leave. He was murdered. The blow to the back of the skull was hard enough to kill him instantly. The injury showed no signs of a fall. It was clean, direct, delivered by someone behind him, possibly, with a metal tool. And that changed everything. The case was officially reopened. It was no longer a missing person file. It was now a homicide investigation. Detectives pulled the old reports, photos, witness statements, audio tapes. Everything that had once been boxed and shelved was now spread across a long table in the cold case unit. One officer flipped through the original roof. Inspection from '94. Another reread. The daughter's old interview. They mapped out the street, the property, every corner of that house. They knew someone had planned this, built the hiding space, Waited for the right moment. This wasn't random. It wasn't panic. It was personal. Someone had gotten close to David Merritt that day. Someone who knew where he'd be. Someone who had a reason. And someone who knew how to make a body disappear. For 11 years, detectives started where it all began. The street. They returned to David's old neighborhood with clipboards, folders, and quiet determination. Many neighbors from 1994 had moved away. Some had passed on. Others claimed they didn't remember anything. But a few still lived on the same street. One woman opened her door halfway. She said she remembered hearing something weird that day, like banging, maybe yelling. But it was summer. Windows were closed. Nothing was clear. Another neighbor, older now, paused for a long time. Then she said something the detectives hadn't heard before. "Y'all talked to Earl yet?" "Who's Earl?" the detective asked. She pointed down the block. "Earl Gannon. He used to own that house. The one David vanished from." She didn't say much more, just added, "He left fast after that summer. Didn't even sell it himself, just hired someone to handle it." The name went into the file. Detectives ran it through public records. There it was. Earl Gannon, former owner, retired plumber. Lived at that exact address until late 1994. Now they had a name. A timeline. And possibly a man who had access to the space under the house. Earl Gannon wasn't just a homeowner. He was a professional plumber. He had worked for 30 years in residential homes. Knew about water lines, heating ducts, and crawl spaces. He wasn't the kind of man who'd accidentally build a trapdoor. He'd know exactly how to hide one. Detectives pulled the home's utility records. One stuck out immediately. August 4th, 1994. Just 2 weeks before David vanished. There was a logged service call. Pipe repair. Southeast wall. Interior access. Technician. E. Gannon. It wasn't a company. It was him. He'd written it himself. The note said he had entered the crawl space for inspection. No permit. No inspection follow-up. No one double-checked the work. It was never questioned. Earl sold the house just months after David disappeared. He didn't list it himself. He used a third-party sale. Didn't even meet the buyers. Police checked. He had no criminal record. But he did move 3 towns away. Fast. They tried to contact him. Too late. Earl Gannon had died in 2002, but the case didn't close there, because Earl had a son, still alive, still in the area, and police were about to learn. The son had a sealed juvenile record for violence. As detectives dug deeper into Earl Gannon's history, they made a disturbing discovery. He was never interviewed. Not once. In 1994, when David Merritt vanished, police had gone door to door. But Earl's name never came up. The reason? A simple clerical error. County property records from that summer still listed the previous owner, not Earl. The paperwork hadn't updated yet. So detectives thought the house belonged to someone else. By the time the records were corrected, Earl had already sold the home and moved several states away. No one followed up. No one realized the mistake. In their old notes, there wasn't a single mention of his name. One detective shook his head and said, "We missed him." It wasn't just an oversight. It was a gap. A hole in the original case. And now, 11 years later, it had returned to the surface, just like the hatch. While Earl had moved away, his son never did. Matthew Gannon. Now in his early 30s. Lives just 1 town over. Quiet. Unmarried. No social media. Still carries his dad's last name. He works part-time doing maintenance for a local school district. Fixes light bulbs. Cleans gutters. Repairs roofing. In 1994, he was 17 years old. That summer, he was between schools, on suspension. And records show he sometimes helped his dad with plumbing jobs. Neighbors remembered seeing a teenage boy at the Gannon house that year, working in the yard. hauling tools, smoking alone on the porch. He wasn't close to anyone. He didn't talk much. But what really caught detectives' attention was this. In that same summer, Matthew had done roofing work. He was listed as a temporary roofer's assistant for 2 local homes. David Merritt vanished while fixing his roof. Now there was a second person with access, tools, and time, a teenager with a temper, and a possible motive no one had ever explored. Detectives filed a court order to unseal Matthew Gannon's juvenile record. What they found shook them. In 1988, 6 years before David Merritt went missing, Matthew, then just 11 years old, was arrested for assault. The file said he attacked a classmate with a wrench. The victim survived, but had a fractured skull. Witnesses said it was sudden, unprovoked, no warning. Just rage. Matthew was placed in a youth mental health facility for 8 months. After that, the record went quiet. There were no follow-up charges. He was released. The file was sealed once. He turned 18. That's why no one had seen it before. But now, with David's murder confirmed, detectives were allowed access. The report described Matthew as impulsive, mechanically skilled, and unemotional after violent episodes. 1. Detective read the last line out loud. Patient shows no remorse. Recommends long-term monitoring. But there had been no monitoring. Matthew had stayed in the same area, kept his head down. And maybe kept one terrible secret all these years. Detectives kept digging into Matthew Gannon's past and found one more piece that fit a little too well. Employment records. In July of 1994, the same summer David Merritt vanished, Matthew was officially hired by a local roofing contractor as a seasonal assistant. Just 17 years old, no license, but allowed to work on private residential jobs under supervision. One of the addresses listed: a house 3 blocks from David's. Same neighborhood, same layout, same rooftops. But here's the strange part. Matthew quit that job 2 weeks after David disappeared. No warning, no explanation. Just stopped showing up. The company never reported it. Just assumed he wasn't interested. Until now. No one had ever looked back at those records. Now they meant something. He was in the right area. He had tools. He had a reason to be on rooftops. And he knew exactly how to access the crawl space, because his father had once owned that house. One detective said quietly, this kid didn't just vanish from the radar. He walked right through the middle of it. By this point, detectives had stopped calling it a coincidence. They laid out the timeline. July 1994. Matthew is hired as a roofer's assistant. Mid-August, he's seen around the Gannon house. Sometimes alone, sometimes with tools. August 19th, David Merritt disappears while fixing his own roof. 1 week later, Matthew quits the roofing job and disappears from that street completely. 3 months later, David's wife gets a strange, silent phone call. No trace. 2002, Earl Gannon dies. Never questioned. 2005. David's body is discovered beneath the same house Earl once owned, with signs of a blunt force injury. Now layer this on top of what else they knew. Matthew had access. He had a violent past. He had time. He had motive. And for over a decade, he had managed to stay hidden, just like the room beneath the floor. Detectives didn't have a confession. Not yet. But everything around Matthew Gannon's life was starting to cave in. Detectives believed. They finally understood what happened. It was August 19th, 1994. David Merritt was fixing the roof. It was a normal day. His wife was at work. His daughter was watching cartoons inside. Then, David heard something. A noise under the house. A thud. Maybe footsteps. Maybe voices. He thought someone was breaking in through the crawl space. So he went to check. No weapon. No flashlight. Just a man in work clothes and gloves, curious, maybe concerned. He had no reason to think danger was waiting for him. He had no idea someone might already be down there. Detectives believe David opened the access panel and climbed into the crawl space. He never came back out. They think he was ambushed, hit from behind, possibly with a tool or heavy object. Fast. Brutal. No time to react. Just like that, David Merritt was gone. Not missing. Not hiding. He'd been attacked while trying to protect his own home, and nobody heard a thing. Inside the crawl space, there were signs of movement, shifts in the dirt, scrape marks along the baseboards, a torn glove half buried. Detectives believe David fought back. For at least a few seconds, he resisted, but it was dark, tight, and silent. His attacker had the advantage. There were no bruises on the body, just a fatal strike to the back of the skull. One hit. Then stillness. It wasn't planned. Whoever killed David didn't expect it. There was no backup plan, no car waiting, no gloves or tools to clean up. But instead of running or calling for help, the killer stayed. They didn't leave the house. They used what they had: wood, nails, dirt. And they built something. The panel above the crawl space was covered. The floorboards were patched. The wall was sealed. The killer created a place that didn't exist. A hole in the floor. A false wall. A room no one knew was there. And then they walked away. The house sold. New families moved in. And for 11 years, no one found it. Because the killer didn't disappear into the night. They disappeared into the walls. The chamber wasn't a quick hideout. It was built with care. Every board had been cut to size. Every nail was hammered in by hand. The edges were sealed to keep smell from leaking out. A layer of insulation was tucked behind the drywall. This wasn't panic. This was control. Detectives believe the killer came back after the murder. Maybe. More than once. To fix. To tighten. To clean. What shocked police most was how close everything was. The ladder. The bedroom. The kitchen. All just feet away from where David's body had been hidden. One detective called it the most disturbing concealment he'd ever seen. This wasn't about getting rid of evidence. This was about pretending it never happened. David wasn't buried miles away. He was kept right where it happened, in the house he loved. And no one knew. Not for 11 years. Even with everything pointing to him, Matthew Gannon was never arrested. The detectives had built a strong case timeline, motive, opportunity. Matthew had been in the right place, with the right skills, and the wrong kind of past. But they didn't have what they needed most. Hard proof. No fingerprints on the hatch. No DNA on the ladder. No confession. No witnesses. The original crime scene had been cleaned, sealed, and walked over for more than a decade. And without that final piece, the district attorney made a decision. They would not file charges. Not yet. The police weren't happy. Neither was the Merritt family. But in the eyes of the law, there was still too much missing. Still, the town had made up its mind. Matthew's name spread fast. He stopped showing up to work. His neighbors avoided him. Stores wouldn't serve him. He had never been convicted. But he had already been sentenced. By the street, he never left. The case was starting to feel bigger than one missing man. A retired police officer stepped forward. He had seen the news. David Merritt, the hidden room, the sealed hatch. And it reminded him of something from a long time ago. Back in the 1970s, 2 boys vanished from the same street. Both were 13. Both lived within a few houses of each other. Both disappeared without a trace. At the time, police believed they were runaways, but the officer said it always felt off. Too quiet, no bags packed, no notes left behind. The last place both boys were seen? 2 doors down from where David Merritt lived. The same house. The one once owned by Earl Gannon. the records were thin. The case was closed within months. But now, decades later, with a sealed hatch and a hidden room discovered, that old officer said one line. The detectives couldn't forget. I don't think David was the first. When news broke about the hidden room, an elderly woman from the neighborhood came forward. She still lived nearby. She remembered the two missing boys. Their names, their faces. The night they vanished, she kept something in her drawer for years, a folded yellowed newspaper clipping. Their school photos were printed side by side, smiling, young, gone. As she handed the paper to the detective, her hand shook. They told us it was nothing, she said. Said the boys just ran off. But she had never believed it. They were good kids. One of them mowed my lawn every week. Then she looked toward the old Gannon house. Her voice dropped low. I always said that street was hiding something. Now, it finally felt like someone was ready to listen. Detectives returned with a new search warrant. This time, the target wasn't David's old home. It was the one 2 doors down, the former home of Earl and Matthew Gannon. The house had changed owners multiple times. New paint, new windows. But the bones of the place hadn't changed. Officers walked slowly through the halls. Flashlights scanned the floor. Nothing at first. Then a dog handler signaled. His canine had locked in near the back bedroom. The animal sniffed the air, then froze, scratching at a specific spot on the floor. Something was there. One officer ran his hand across the wall. It felt hollow, thin drywall. A gap behind it. Another knelt and peeled back the carpet. Old wood, worn, but familiar. The same kind of boards found at David's house. Everything about it felt the same. And suddenly, the team knew exactly what they were looking at. Beneath the old carpet, near the edge of the closet, they saw it. A second hatch. Same style, same iron handle, same wood. It had been nailed shut, just like the first one. One officer whispered, "It's a match." They didn't open it right away. This time, they waited for backup. Forensics, cameras, a full team. No one wanted to make a mistake. Not now. The whole room went silent. Everyone in that house understood what they might be about to find. A sealed hatch, a second hidden chamber, and maybe more names. More answers, or worse, more victims. What had once been called a perfect little street was now something else. A place where people vanished. A place where boards were measured, hammers swung, and secrets were buried just inches below everyday life. And as the officers surrounded that second hatch, it finally became clear. David Merritt's case was never just one case.